Good afternoon, folks. This is Brother Allen with Bible Commentary. We are continuing on with the man of sin in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. This will conclude the second coming of Christ in the Thessalonians. So let us take up where we left off last time. It does not follow that the death of Nero was to be brought about by immediate supernatural agency, because it is said that the Lord shall slay him with the breath of his mouth. Herod Agrippa was smitten by the angel of the Lord, but this does not exclude the operation of natural causes. He was eaten of worms, and he gave up the ghost, according to Acts 12, verse 23. So Nero was overtaken by the divine judgment, though he received his death blow from the sword of the assassin or from his own hand. Lastly, it is scarcely necessary to make good the title of Nero to the appellation the man of sin. It will be observed that it is the prolificacy of his personal character that stamps him with this distinctive epithet, as if he were the very impersonification and embodiment of vice. Such indeed was Nero, whose name has become synonym for all that is base, cruel, and vile, the highest in rank and the lowest in character in the Roman world, a monster of wickedness even among pagans who were not squeamish about morality and who were familiar with the most corrupt society on the face of the earth. The following graphic delineation of the character of Nero is taken from Coinbear and Howsam. Over the distinguished bench of judges presided the representative of the most powerful monarchy which ever existed, the absolute ruler of the whole civilized world. But the reverential awe which his position naturally suggested was changed into contempt and loathing by the character of the sovereign who now presided over the supreme tribunal. For Nero was a man whom even the awful attribute of power equal to the gods could not render august except in title. The fear and horror excited by his omnipotence and his cruelty were blended with contempt for his ignoble lust of praise and his shameless licentiousness. He had not as yet plunged into the extravagance of tyranny which, at a later period, exhausted the patience of his subjects and brought him to destruction. Hitherto, his public measures, which had been guided by sage advisers, and his cruelty had injured his own family rather than the state. But already, at the age of 25, he had murdered his innocent wife and his adopted brother, and had dyed his hands in the blood of his own mother. Yet even these enormities seem to have disgusted the Romans less than the prostitution of the imperial purple by publicly performing as a musician on the stage and as a charioteer in the circus. His degrading want of dignity and insatiable appetite for vulgar applause drew tears from the councilors and servants of his house, who could see him slaughter his nearest relatives without remonstrance. But there is another reason why Nero is branded with this epithet. The name man of sin was not unknown to Hebrew history. It had already been given to the one was not only a monster of cruelty and wickedness, but also a bitter enemy and persecutor of the Jewish people. It would not have been possible to pronounce a name more hateful to Jewish ears than the name Antiochus Epiphanes. He was the Nero of his age, the inveterate enemy of Israel, the profaner of the temple, the sanguinary persecutor of the people of God. In the first book of Maccabees, we find the name the man of sinner given to Antiochus, and it seems highly probable that the epithet man of sin was chosen to designate a person of like character and destined to a similar fate with Antiochus, the relentless tyrant and persecutor who became a monument of the wrath of God. The parallel between the man of sin and Antiochus Epiphanes is particularly noticed by Bengel, who points out that the description of the former in verse 4 is borrowed from the description of the latter in Daniel 11, verse 36. The comment of Bengel is well worthy of quotation. This, then, is what Paul says. The day of Christ does not come unless there be fulfilled in the man of sin what Daniel predicted of Antiochus. The prediction is more suitable to the man of sin who corresponds to Antiochus and is worse than he. We shall find in the sequel that this is not the only passage in which Antiochus Epiphanes is referred to as the prototype of Nero. But the question must be asked, why should the revelation of Nero in his true character be a matter of such concern to the apostle and to the Christians of Thessalonica? The answer is not far to seek. It was the ferocity of this lawless monster that first let loose all the power of Rome to crush and destroy the Christian name. It was by him that torrents of innocent blood were to be shed and the most exquisite tortures inflicted upon unoffending Christians. It was before this sanguinary tribunal that St. Paul was yet to stand and plead for his life, and from his lips that the sentence was to come that doomed him to a violent death. But more than this, it was under Nero and by his orders that the final Jewish war was commenced, and that darkest chapter in the annals of Israel was opened, which terminated in the siege and the capture of Jerusalem, the destruction of the temple, and the extinction of the national polity. This was the consummation predicted by our Lord as the end of the age and the coming of his kingdom. The revelation of the man of sin, therefore, as antecedent to the parousia, was a matter that deeply concerned every Christian disciple. We can now understand why the apostle should use such caution in writing on the subject like this. It was from no affection of oracular obscurity, but from prudential motives of the most intelligible kind. There were many prying eyes and calumnious tongues in Thessalonica that only waited an opportunity to denounce the Christians as disaffected and seditious men, secret plotters against the authority of Caesar. To write openly on such subjects would be in the highest degree indiscreet and perilous, nor was it necessary, for they had discussed these matters before in many a private conversation. Do you recollect, he asked, that when I was with you, I was often telling you these things, said Paul. more than hints were unnecessary to the Thessalonians, for they had a key to his meaning, which subsequent readers had not. Nor is it greatly to be wondered, as if obscurity had gathered round the teachings of the apostle on this subject. Events, which to contemporaries are full of intense interest, often became not only uninteresting, but unintelligible to posterity. Yet it is somewhat strange that the very obvious reference to contemporary history and to Nero should have been so generally overlooked. This is the most ancient interpretation of the passage related to the man of sin. Chrysostom, commenting on the mystery of iniquity, St. Paul, speaks here of Nero as being the type of the Antichrist, for he also wished to be thought a god. This opinion is often referred to by Augustine, Theodoret, and others. Bengel, referring to the obstacle to the manifestation of the man of sin, says this: the ancients thought that Claudius was this check. Hence, it appears they deemed Nero, Claudius's successor, the man of sin. Moses Stewart has collected a great number of authorities for the identification of Nero with the man of sin. He remarks, the idea that Nero was the man of sin mentioned by St. Paul and the Antichrist, spoken of so often in the epistles of St. John, prevailed extensively for a long time in the early church. And again, Augustine says, what means the declaration that the mystery of iniquity already works? Some suppose this to be spoken of the Roman emperor, and therefore Paul did not speak in plain words, because he would not incur the charge of calumny for having spoke evil of the Roman emperor, although he always expected that what he had said would be understood as applying to Nero. We consider it a fact of peculiar importance that a conclusion arrived at on quite independent grounds should be found to have the sanction of some of the greatest names of antiquity. We are, however, not at all disposed to rest this interpretation upon external authority. We are inclined to think that the internal evidence in favor of the identification of Nero as the man of sin amounts almost, if not altogether, to demonstration. We have yet to deal with the confirmation of this fact, furnished by the revelation, which we presume to think will produce conviction in every candid mind. Folks, Nero was the man of sin. Paul, speaking to the Thessalonians, plainly identified and revealed the man of sin to the Thessalonians. The man of sin is not some future man that's going to appear upon human history. If we let the Bible speak for itself, Paul and many of the other writers plainly identify Nero as that man of sin. This concludes our second coming of Christ in the Thessalonians. Next time we will begin with the parousia in the epistles of the Corinthians. Until then, may God bless us all.